The next round of level 1 CFA exams is coming up in just a couple of weeks as of the release of this video, which is the perfect time to start talking about what I've always called the secret to passing any of the CFA exams, especially the level 1 exam. This is the final week process that I personally followed for all of my exams. I totally believe this is the biggest differentiating factor between those candidates who will pass the exams and those who won't. I didn't come up with this myself. This is a tip that I received from a Mark Meldrum video 7 or 8 years ago, right before my first CFA exam. I followed his tips exactly in the 3 days, 4 days preceding that exam, and I think it made a world of a difference. I know I wouldn't have passed the level 2 or level 3 exams without this, but especially if you've been on a time crunch studying for your level 1 exam, the biggest difference maker that you can make in the final few days is memorizing formulas. Memorizing every formula that you may need to know on any of the questions that come up on the test. In this video, we're going to talk about the best way to memorize formulas so that you can learn all the formulas you're going to need to know as quickly and as effectively as possible. We'll talk about why memorizing formulas is so important, why it's really the secret sauce to boosting your level of preparation in the final few days before an exam, and then basically why it's the most important thing you can do with your time in the last 3 days. The reason why memorizing formulas is so important for the level 1 exam specifically is because the level 1 exam actually has the most simplistic mathematic in a lot of the sections compared to the level 2 or level 3 test. So when you're doing simple algebra, 3 or 4 variable algebra equations come up all the time on level 1, whether it be in economics or equity or other sections. As long as you know what the formula is, what the 3 or 4 variables are, it's not hard to pull the information from the question that's being asked of you in just, literally 6 seconds on a calculator to get the answer. If you're prepping for level 1 and you haven't done a lot of mock exam style practice questions yet, then you may not know this, but there are a lot of simple algebra type questions on these level 1 tests. So you have to know every single formula that could potentially be asked of you. I think it's like the easiest way to pick up extra points, again, in the last few days before your test. It's a huge difference maker. Trust me, follow this process. You will have no regrets that you spent the last 48 to 72 hours doing this. And at the end of the day, this could be the difference between you ultimately never even passing level 1 or becoming a CFA charter holder. I truly believe it was for me. Props to Mark Meldrum. Let's get into it. Before you start memorizing anywhere from 100 to 200 or more formulas, you have to first have the list of formulas that you are going to memorize from. There are a few ways to do this. I think the best way to do this, and it may sort of be too late if you haven't been writing formulas along the way, the best way to have a list of formulas is to, throughout your prep process, over the last 4 or 5, 6 plus months, every time you had to use a formula to solve an equation, you're then taking that formula and writing it on a separate formula sheet. That's what I did. Well, technically, I kept it in the same notebook and I put stars and circles around the formulas and then later rewrote those all into a new formula sheet. But the point is, any formula that I ever needed to apply to answer a question correctly, whether that have been an online CFA practice question, a Wiley practice question, I used Wiley test prep, whether it were on a mock exam or a blue box, an end of chapter question or a blue box example, which I know they are now gray box examples, but any of those types of practice questions you've done over the past 6 months, if a formula was needed to answer a question, there's a chance that that formula will be needed on your real CFA exam. So you need a very comprehensive list. You can purchase formula sheets from the major test prep providers. I know Wiley and Kaplan both have them. In my opinion, those lists are too long. They include sometimes even ways to derive other formulas into the shorter versions of those formulas that are easier to remember, but you really don't need to know how to derive these formulas, especially when we're just talking about trying to memorize as many things as you can over a 3-day window and then regurgitate them on exam day. So you can buy those formula sheets. They're helpful. I think they're a little bit too long. You're going to want to sort of condense them. Another wonderful way to do that, as a shameless plug for myself, is to purchase the real formula sheets that I personally wrote, hand wrote, consolidated, hand wrote again, ended up typing them out, and I have now listed them on my Patreon page. I re-updated them as recently as 2021, so they're not going to include formulas for the most recent additions to the CFA curriculum, but they will include formulas that apply to the majority of what is still the CFA, especially level 1 exam curriculum. So those are available on my Patreon page. If you did not keep track of every formula you used over the last 6 months, like I just described, I did do that during my exam process. I would recommend you actually do that, prepping for level 2 or level 3 if you're one level before those exams. But I do have the actual formula sheets that I personally studied from and used to pass all the exams on my Patreon. Link is in the description. The regiment that was explained to me by, again, Dr. Mark Meldrum, love him, is very simple, very, very boring, and very effective effective at getting the human brain to put into medium-term memory a bunch of random algebra equations or formulas. So that is, you start with your formula sheet, probably take it into chunks of like 10 different formulas. Start with formula number 1, handwrite it 10 times. Then go to formula number 2, handwrite it 10 times. Then go to formula number 3 from your formula sheet, handwrite it 10 times. Your wrist is gonna be killing you. It's probably, especially in today's age, probably gonna be the most handwriting you've done in years, but something about taking a pen to a paper and continuing, especially because like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, you handwrite it out, you're probably not needing to look at the formula on the line right above that you just previously hand wrote out. You're starting to remember it. And so literally writing it out like that many times is effective at jamming that formula into your brain so that you're gonna have the information you need. After you have rewritten 10 different formulas 10 times each, you pause, you sort of cover them up, and you quiz yourself. Go back to, well, actually, I forgot to mention you want a name for that formula. So it might be Gordon growth model, and then dash, and then the formula. So when you go to re-quiz yourself, you'll cover up all of the formulas that you re-hand wrote and just look at the title of that, Gordon growth model. Can you recite it out loud or in your head, either way? If you can recite it, move on. You've probably basically memorized that formula. If you can't, and for me, there were usually 2 or 3 out of any group of 10 formulas that I was not able to regurgitate in my head or out loud right after handwriting them all. Then you rewrite those probably 5 or 8 times each. So that's another 15 to 20 formula lines that you're handwriting out in a notebook pad. You're gonna want a fresh notebook to do all of this writing. But the point is, then you practice on those 3 that you might have gotten wrong after the first review. At the end of that process, you will basically have memorized 10 formulas. Then do it again for the next 10. This is time consuming. I'll talk about how you structure the timing of this in just a moment, but again, very effective at pounding these formulas into your head. It will make a massive difference on exam day. Trust me on this. So if you're following the process here, you're gonna be handwriting maybe as many as 200 formulas at least 10 times each. That's a lot of handwriting, right? And certainly more than that actually, because you're not always gonna get every formula right when you sort of mentally review them. So in terms of the amount of time that you need to allocate towards this, for me, I took 3 days off of work for each of my CFA exams. I would spend 2 full days, usually 12 to 16 hours each day, just doing this handwriting and retesting self formula process. I took the final 24 hours for the exam completely off. I'm not gonna talk about why that is in this video. I also believe that is a very helpful aspect to the last 3 days of CFA exam prep, but I talk about that in more depth in other videos on my channel. So if you wanna hear about that final 24 hours, watch those. But basically, we're allocating 24 total hours amongst those 2 days, 12 and 12, maybe a little bit more, towards handwriting these formulas. You will get through handwriting even 200 formulas in that period of time. So once you've gone through that entire process that I described, where you're kind of retesting yourself for all 200 formulas, then you're gonna pause, maybe go eat a steak dinner or something, come back to your formula sheet, and then you're gonna go back and start retesting yourself from formula number 1, top of the list again. Because after you've been quizzing yourself on formulas 160 to 200, hypothetically, maybe you have forgotten back on formula number 1. So you're going back to the start of the list again. This may be in the, it was always Wednesday, Thursday that I was doing this, and then I'd take Friday off and exam on Saturday. So this may be like Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening when you're finally in this process, but it's like the additional review. But there's an important step for this additional review that you're gonna wanna note down. So when you go back to the top of the list, any of the formulas that you don't get right, you need to highlight those, put a big circle around those. It's gonna be important for actually exam day. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But you highlight them, circle them, and then you're gonna handwrite those formulas out again 10 times. Now, if I had to guess, when I was re-reviewing those 200 formulas, I probably didn't get 20 to 30 of them right the final time around. So I was circling 20 or 30 formulas, re-handwriting 20 or 30 formulas, either 5 or 10 times each, and then re-quizzing myself on those. By the end of Thursday, the second day, you're gonna be totally sick of this, and really your hand's gonna be exhausted, your mind's gonna be exhausted, but you will have taken probably the single or the greatest 2-day leap in terms of your CFA exam preparedness that you did during the entire process. Many of the formulas you're gonna be familiar with because you've done practice questions, hopefully over the past month or two, but some of them are just gonna require this level of memorization, which is why this is such a huge difference maker. So then you take Friday off. In my case, it was a Friday, but the day before the exam, totally off. I wouldn't look at formulas or anything else, but exam day, that morning, I'm re-reviewing those 20 or 30 formulas that I got wrong a second time around during the final review. And that's why it was important to recircle those again or re-highlight them in the final afternoon or evening of this process, because those are the ones that you're iffy on and you're gonna wanna double down on again. And then usually, like, I would do this on the drive to the exam center. I know it's a little bit different now. They're more accessible with prometric testing centers, but I had a 3-hour drive. I would take those 3 hours and just practice all the formulas again, specifically the ones that I had gotten wrong in the sort of final review in the evening of my last study study day. You may want to go back over the rest of them. You're gonna really start to build a lot of confidence during that 2 hours right before the exam, in my opinion, because you'll realize how many of these formulas you actually know. And man, once you've done that, you're gonna sit down at that exam center. A question about a GDP calculation, like the change in population versus the change in education, I don't know, I don't remember any of them now, or very few of them. That question will pop up and you'll go, holy smokes, I just recited this formula and hand wrote this formula like 40 times over the last 3 days. You're gonna instantly know which variables to plug in and you're gonna be able to answer that question very quickly. So this is the secret. I mean, I literally believe this is a major difference maker. It's probably the second single most important factor. The biggest factor is just the time spent studying. Memorizing formulas is not going to outperform someone who studied 3 or 4 months more than somebody else. But outside of just pure time spent studying, the biggest difference maker is if you have formulas memorized versus if you don't. And this is my recommendation. I hope everyone watching this video can allocate 24 hours in the 3 days leading right up to the exam to do this. It will make, I think you'll be surprised at how much of a difference it'll make and how much it's gonna boost your confidence going into that exam center. Best of luck studying. Props to Mark Meldrum for these ideas. They helped me a ton. I hope they help everyone else too. Good luck out there.